Mama. Her voice cracked. Mama Promise jumped, her eyes darting to her daughter like a snake caught mid-strike. What are you doing there? Go back to bed. But Chioma stood her ground, eyes wide with confusion and hurt. Mama, why are you selling me? The man sighed and stood up, brushing invisible dust from his silk trousers. If she knows, it will be harder. Please, Chioma begged, stepping into the room now. I'll work harder. I'll fetch more firewood. I'll sell groundnuts at the market. Please don't send me away. Mama Promise's face hardened. I need a better life, Chioma. You are nothing but a burden to me. Before we continue, kindly comment where you're watching from, so we'll give you a shout out in our next video. Chioma had never known what it felt like to belong. From the moment she could understand words, she learned that her presence in the house was a reminder of something unforgivable. She was the child born out of wedlock, the daughter of John and the late woman no one in the family spoke kindly about. Her existence was like a splinter under Mama Promise's skin, a constant irritation. Mama Promise, her father's first and only wife, had always hated her. But Chioma knew deep down, it wasn't because of how she came into the world. No, it was because of something far worse in Mama Promise's eyes. John, her husband, loved Chioma too much. It was not the love of a man for a woman. It was the kind of love a father should give a child. But John's affection for Chioma came with a fondness, an attention, that made Mama Promise burn with quiet rage. Whenever John sat down to eat, it was Chioma he called. Chioma, where is my sweet daughter? Come and bring me water, he would shout, ignoring Mama Promise's efforts and bypassing Promise, their first son, as if he wasn't even there. Each time, Mama Promise's lips would tighten, her eyes following Chioma like a hawk waiting to strike. Promise, too, watched her, but with something colder, resentment. One afternoon, as Chioma swept the dusty compound, Mama Promise's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Move faster, you good-for-nothing girl. You think because your father calls you sweet, you own this house? Chioma kept her head low. Yes, Mama, she murmured, even though she knew Mama Promise's words were dipped in venom. Later that evening, when John returned from wandering the village aimlessly, jobless as always, he found Mama Promise fuming. That's your Chioma, she spat, not bothering to hide her disgust. She walks around here like she's the queen. Is it because you call her to serve you? Have you forgotten who your first child is? John waved her off, his eyes already searching for Chioma. Leave that girl alone. She's the only one who listens to me in this house. Promise stood at the door, arms crossed, his eyes darting between his parents. He had heard this argument too many times. No matter how hard his mother tried, Chioma would always have his father's heart. When night fell, Chioma sat outside under the mango tree, tracing lines in the sand with a stick. Promise approached quietly, sitting beside her but keeping a distance. You always make my mother angry, Promise said without looking at her. Chioma sighed. I don't mean to. I just want peace. You shouldn't have been born, he muttered. Her heart clenched, but she didn't respond. Words like that had followed her like shadows her whole life. Their father's failures were no secret in the village. Once a man of means, John had sold his lands, one after another, chasing women and wasting money until nothing remained. Their family now lived in poverty, scraping by on whatever odd jobs Mama Promise could find. It was shameful, but John never seemed to care. Despite everything, he insisted both Promise and Chioma attend the village school. Not because he believed in education, but because he could not stand the villagers whispering about how he had failed even to educate his children. Promise was a year younger than Chioma, but they sat in the same class. Their father could not afford to send them separately, so they walked to and from school together, even when the tension between them was unbearable. One rainy morning, as they walked back home, Promise broke the silence. Why do you act like we are siblings when you know you don't belong? Chioma stopped walking and stared at him. The rain fell in thin sheets around them. Because whether you like it or not, she said softly, you are the only brother I have. Promise scoffed, but there was something uncertain in his eyes. Days turned to weeks, and the weight of poverty pressed harder on their household. Their father spent most days drinking palm wine and lounging in the village square, oblivious to how much his wife toiled. Mama Promise grew harsher, her words sharper, and the divide in the family deeper. One evening, as Chioma sat plaiting her hair under the moonlight, John stumbled into the compound, drunk. He looked around, calling her name. Chioma. My sweet girl, where are you? From the doorway, Mama Promise watched, her lips pursed tight. Promise stood beside her, quiet but burning inside. One day, Mama Promise whispered to her son, she will bring this house down. But Chioma, sitting alone in the shadows, wished only for one thing, that this house would one day feel like home. The evening air in Umadim village was heavy with the scent of burning firewood and wet earth. Inside the small, dimly lit parlor of Mama Promise's house, a stranger sat stiffly on an old wooden stool, his fine robe and smooth skin betraying that he was no common man. He looked like someone who belonged in the palace, not in this broken home at the edge of the village. Mama Promise leaned forward, her eyes sharp and her voice low. You said the king is still looking for girls. The man nodded, adjusting his beaded wrist. The palace is always looking. The king pays well. 30,000 gold coins for a strong, pretty girl. Mama Promise smiled faintly, a smile that did not reach her eyes. I have one for you. The man raised an eyebrow. Your daughter. She is not my daughter, Mama Promise snapped quickly, her lips tightening. She's nothing to me. A child born of shame. My late husband's bastard, left in my care when her mother died like a useless goat. She has been a burden in this house. The man folded his arms, looking at her curiously. Why do you want to sell her? Mama Promise's voice dropped lower. Because she is the reason I suffered. My husband, John, never loved me. He loved her. Every time I served him food, he would call for her. Every time he should have praised Promise, his own son, he would smile at her instead. She turned my home into misery. The man gave a small nod. 30,000 gold coins. She'll live in the palace. But you know, once she enters there, she will never come back. That is what I want, Mama Promise whispered. Take her. Let her be useful for something. Unseen by them, a small figure stood quietly by the door. Chioma's heart pounded so loudly she thought it would burst from her chest. She had come to the parlor looking for firewood, but instead she heard her name like a knife cutting through the darkness. Her legs shook as she listened to her stepmother batter her life away like a piece of meat. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she swallowed hard and pushed the door open. Mama, her voice cracked like dry wood. The man turned sharply, his hand instinctively going to the dagger at his waist. Mama Promise's face twisted in annoyance, not guilt. What are you doing here, Chioma? I heard everything, Chioma's lips quivered. You want to sell me? Mama Promise didn't even blink. So what if I do? You've been nothing but a curse in this house. You should be happy I finally found someone who wants you. Mama, please, Chioma's voice broke as tears slid down her cheeks. I've done everything for you. I fetch water, I cook, I clean. I call you Mama. Mama Promise scoffed. Don't call me that. You were never mine. Promise, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, looked up at her now, his face blank. Stop crying, Chioma. It's not like anyone will miss you. Chioma's eyes darted to him, fresh hurt slamming into her chest. Even you, promise. I treated you like my brother. I shared my food with you when there was nothing. I protected you in school when boys mocked you. Promise looked away coldly. My mother says you're the reason we are poor. Mama Promise folded her arms. Your father is not here to save you. He went hunting today. By the time he returns, you'll be gone. Chioma shook her head, stepping back as if their words had struck her physically. Why do you hate me so much? Mama Promise stood up, her face unreadable. Because my husband, the father you love so much, looked at you every day like you were his jewel, while he looked at me like I was nothing. The man cleared his throat impatiently. If she knows already, I can take her tonight. Easier. Mama Promise nodded without hesitation. Take her. What use is she to me here? Chioma's knees gave way, and she dropped to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The man moved to grab her, but Chioma flinched away. I am not a slave, she cried. I am a person. But Mama Promise only scoffed. You are nothing. Outside, the moon watched silently. The wind carried the sound of her cries, but no one came to save her. Far away, in the forest, her father, John, unaware of the wickedness unfolding in his home, hunted for rabbits, believing he still had a daughter to come home to. The night in Umadim village was unusually cold. A deep silence wrapped around the compound like a heavy cloth, broken only by the desperate wailing of a young girl whose world had just crumbled. No. Please, Mama, please. Chioma cried out, her knees scraping against the rough ground as she struggled to hold onto the stool in the parlor. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Don't do this to me. But Mama Promise stood over her like a stone, her arms folded across her chest, her face unmoved. Stop crying like a fool, Mama Promise snapped. I have done you a favor. You should be grateful someone is willing to pay for you. The man from the palace, Obika, who had been quietly watching, shifted impatiently. With a signal, he called out through the door, his voice calm but firm. Chinidu. Okafor. Come in. Almost instantly, two tall, heavily built men appeared from the darkness outside, stepping into the house without a word. They looked nothing like the poor men of Umadim village, they moved like shadows, their faces blank, as cold. That's her, Obika said, pointing at Chioma like she was a piece of wood. Take her. Chioma's eyes widened in terror as the men approached. She crawled backward on the ground, shaking her head. No. Please, I beg you. Mama, promise, please say something. Don't let them take me. Promise, standing by the doorframe, barely looked at her. His face was empty, just like his mother's. Mama says you must go, Promise muttered. The two men grabbed Chioma firmly by the arms, dragging her to her feet as she screamed and kicked, her braids falling over her face, her sobs tearing through the silence of the night. Let me go, she wailed. Where are you taking me? To the palace, one of the men muttered without emotion. You belong to the king now. Mama Promise stepped outside, carrying an old raffia basket filled with Chioma's clothes. Without care, she flung the clothes onto the dusty ground like garbage. Promise, she barked. Gather her things. Make sure you throw out every single one of them. I don't want anything that belongs to her in my house. Promise nodded quietly, walking over and kicking Chioma's slippers and small wooden box outside without a second glance. As the men dragged Chioma towards the compound gate, she turned one last time, her voice hoarse from crying. Mama, why? Why do you hate me this much? I've done nothing to you. Mama Promise's eyes met hers briefly, her lips curling into something almost like a smile, but cold and bitter. Because you were never supposed to be here. Her words fell like stones in Chioma's chest. The neighbors did not stir. No one opened their doors or windows. It was too late in the night, and the people of Yumadin village knew better than to interfere in other people's troubles, especially when policemen were involved. The only sound that followed Chioma into the dark night was the shuffling of her bare feet on the ground and the soft clatter of her belongings being tossed into the dust behind her. As they reached the main road, Chioma's legs weakened. "Please," she begged the men holding her. "Please don't take me there. I will do anything." The man holding her right arm shook his head. "The deal is done. Your family took the gold coins. There is no turning back." "My father doesn't know," Chioma sobbed. "He went hunting. He doesn't know." The man sighed but said nothing. It wasn't his business. As the compound behind her disappeared into the darkness, Chioma looked up at the night sky, her heart breaking. She realized in that moment that no one would come to save her. The mother she had loved never loved her. The brother she had protected had let her go without a word. Her fate had been sold for 30,000 gold coins. And tomorrow, when the village awoke, no one would even know she was gone.